Patience. Thank you, everyone, for joining us this evening. I'm very glad to be able to be here with you, especially on this holiday. It's a wonderful opportunity for us to celebrate teachings of the Buddha on this day. As usual, let's just take a moment to settle into our space and to create a very intentional space for ourselves. So, whatever activities we have been occupied with throughout the day, let's put those aside. Whatever running around we've been doing, let's make ourselves fully present together in this space. And with that, let's set a very strong motivation that the reason we are studying this teaching, the reason we're studying the teaching of the Buddha, the reason we are learning how to practice the teachings of the Buddha is not simply for our own benefit, though we do appreciate that we will experience benefit, but it is so that we might be able to be of greater benefit to others. By studying and contemplating and meditating on these teachings, by practicing the teachings of Shakyamuni Buddha as taught by Lama Tsongkhapa, we are going to quickly and more quickly achieve Buddhahood ourselves. And by doing so, we will be endowed with the greatest capacity of wisdom and skillful means that allow us to be a benefit to other sentient beings. So let that be your motivation for coming together today. And as we set that strong motivation, let's go ahead and offer some preliminary prayers. So the first of these we'll do in English, Tibetan rather, in 3 times, and then we'll switch to English. And as usual, I encourage everyone to recite these prayers, even if just quietly. It's important and useful for your mind that you perform the action of reciting them, but more important is that you contemplate them, that you think about the meaning, and that you have the prayers in your mind, right? That's most important. Though reciting them helps you get there. Sange cheran soki chonam la jancho paru dagni kyabsu chi dagi jinsogi pe sonam gi drola pencher sange drupar shok. Sange cheran soki chonam la chanchu paru dagni kyabsu chi dagi jinsogi pe sonam gi drola pincher sange drupar shok. Sange cheran soki chonam la chanchu pardu dagni kyabsu chi dagi jinsogi pe sonam gi drola pincher sange drupar shok. I go for refuge until I am enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By my practice of giving and the other perfections, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. May all sentient beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May all sentient beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May all sentient beings be inseparable from the happiness that is free from suffering. May all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free from attachment for friends and hatred for enemies. May all sentient beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May all sentient beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May all sentient beings be inseparable from the happiness that is free from suffering. May all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free from attachment for friends and hatred for enemies. May all sentient beings have happiness and the causes for happiness. May all sentient beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May all sentient beings be inseparable from the happiness that is free from suffering. May all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free from attachment for friends and hatred for enemies. Reverently I prostrate with my body, speech, and mind. I present clouds of every type of offering, actual and imagined. I declare all my negative actions accumulated since beginningless time, and rejoice in the merit of all holy and ordinary beings. Please remain unto the end of cyclic existence, and turn the wheel of Dharma for living beings. I dedicate my own merits and those of all others to the great enlightenment. The mandala offering will offer once in Tibetan, and then once again in English. Khor Sum shipiki lui xing me do tram ri rab ling shi Ni den gen pandi san ge shi de mi te wa Choe Namadai Ching La Chipar This ground, anointed with perfume, strewn with flowers, adorned with Mount Meru, the four continents, the sun, and the moon. I imagine this as a Buddha field, and I offer it. May all living beings enjoy this pure land. Hiram Guru Ratna Mandala Kam Niryatayami. Continuing with the praise to Shakyamuni Buddha. The founder, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings. To you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakya clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. To the founder, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme God of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings. To you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakya clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. To the founder, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings. To you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakya clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. When, O supreme among humans, you were born on this earth, you paced out 7 strides and then said, I am supreme in this world. To you who are wise, then, I prostrate. With pure bodies, form supremely pure, wisdom ocean like a golden mountain, fame that blazes in the 3 worlds, winner of the best, Lord, to you I prostrate. With the supreme signs, face like spotless moon, color like gold, to you I prostrate. Dust free like you, the 3 worlds are not, incomparably wise one, to you I prostrate. The Savior having great compassion, the Founder having all understanding, the field of merit with qualities like a vast ocean, to you, the one gone to thusness, I prostrate. The purity that frees one from attachment, the virtue that frees one from the lower realms, the one path, the sublime, pure reality to the Dharma that pacifies, I prostrate. Those who are liberated and who also show the path to liberation, the holy field qualified with realizations, who are devoted to the moral precepts, to you, the sublime community intending virtue, I prostrate. Homage to the Supreme Buddha, homage to the Dharma refuge, homage to the great Sangha, to all 3 ever devout homage, to all worthy of respect, bowing with bodies as many as all realms atoms in all aspects, with supreme faith I pay homage. Do not commit any non-virtuous actions. Perform only perfect virtuous actions. Subdue your mind thoroughly. This is the teaching of the Buddha. A star, a visual aberration, a flame of a lamp, an illusion, a drop of dew or a bubble, a dream, a flash of lightning, a cloud, see, condition things as such. Through these merits may sentient beings attain the rank of all-seeing, subdue the foe of faults, and be delivered from samsara's ocean, perturbed by the waves of aging, sickness, and death. And lastly, let's offer the Heart Sutra as a reminder, the importance of the collection of wisdom, right? I prostrate to the Arya triple gem. Thus did I hear at one time, the Bhagawan was dwelling on massive Vulture's mountain in Rajagriha, together with a great community of monks and a great community of bodhisattvas. At that time, the Bhagawan was absorbed in the concentration on the categories of phenomena called profound perception. Also at that time, the Bodhisattva, Mahasattva, Arya, Avalokiteshvara looked upon the very practice of the profound perfection of wisdom and beheld those five aggregates also as empty of inherent nature. Then, through the power of the Buddha, the Venerable Shariputra said this to the Bodhisattva, Mahasattva, Arya, Avalokiteshvara. How should any son of the lineage train who wishes to practice the activity of the profound perfection of wisdom? He said that, and the Bodhisattva, Mahasattva, Arya, Avalokiteshvara said this to the Bodhisattva, to the Venerable Shariputra. Shariputra, any son of the lineage or daughter of the lineage who wishes to practice the activity of the profound perfection of wisdom should look upon it like this, correctly and repeatedly beholding those five aggregates also as empty of inherent nature. Form is empty. Emptiness is form. Emptiness is not other than form. Form is also not other than emptiness. In the same way, feeling, discrimination, compositional factors, and consciousness are empty. Shariputra, likewise, all phenomena are emptiness, without characteristic, unproduced, unceased, stainless, not without stain, not deficient, not fulfilled. Shariputra, therefore, in emptiness, there is no form, no feeling, no discrimination, no compositional factors, no consciousness. No eye, no ear, no nose, no tongue, no body, no mind, no visual form, no sound, no odor, no taste, no object of touch, and no phenomena. There is no I element, and so on up to and including no mind element, and no mental consciousness element. There is no ignorance, no extinction of ignorance, and so on, up to and including no aging and death, and no extinction of aging and death. Similarly, there is no suffering, origination, cessation, and path. There is no exalted wisdom, no attainment, and also no non-attainment. Shariputra, therefore, because there is no attainment, bodhisattvas rely on and dwell in the perfection of wisdom, the mind without obscuration and without fear. Having completely passed beyond error, they reach the end point of nirvana. All the Buddhas who dwell in the three times also manifestly, completely awaken to unsurpassable, perfect, complete enlightenment in reliance upon the perfection of wisdom. Therefore, the mantra of the perfection of wisdom, the mantra of great knowledge, the unsurpassed mantra, the mantra equal to the unequaled, the mantra that thoroughly pacifies all suffering, should be known as the truth, since it is not false. The mantra of the perfection of wisdom is declared. Tayata om gate gate paragate parasamgate bodhi swaha. Shariputra, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva should train in the profound perfection of wisdom like that. Then the Bhagavan arose from that concentration and commended the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Arya Avalokiteshvara, saying, well said, son of the lineage, it is like that, it is like that. One should practice the profound perfection of wisdom just as you have indicated, and even the Tathagatas will rejoice. The Bhagavan, having thus spoken, the Venerable Sharadvatiputra, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Arya Avalokiteshvara, and those surrounding in their entirety, along with the world of gods, humans, asuras, and Gandharvas, were overjoyed and highly praised that which had been spoken by the Bhagavan. And finally, we'll offer a quick prayer to help avert obstacles to our teaching time together. I prostrate to the gathering of dakinis and the three chakras who abide in the holy yoga of using space. By your powers of clairvoyance and magical emanation, look after practitioners like a mother her child. Akasamaratsashadara samaraya pe, akasamaratsashadara samaraya pe, Akasamarata Shadara Samaraya Petayata Om Gate Gate Paragate Parasamgate Bodhi Swaha. By the teachings of the three supreme jewels possessing the power of truth, may inner and outer hindrances be transformed, may they be dispelled, may they be pacified. Shintam Kuriya Swaha. May all negative forces opposed to Dharma be completely pacified. May the host of 80,000 obstacles be pacified. May we be separated from problems and harmful conditions to Dharma. May all enjoyments be in accord with the Dharma. And may there be auspiciousness and perfect happiness here, right now. Great. Thank you so much for joining me. Those. As usual, first off, let me just say I'm very happy to be teaching today. It's great to be able to teach on Shukurduchen. It's a very auspicious occasion for all of us to spend time together, you know. So as usual, You're welcome to ask questions at any time or anything we've gone over in the last couple weeks or anything that comes up today. We'll try to have time at the end to also reserve questions. But if there's a question at any point, you can just go ahead and interrupt politely, and I'll do my best to answer. I won't be able to see, I won't notice if you raise your hand or anything, so you can go ahead and interrupt. That's fine. And just thinking a little bit before we start about Chukar Duchen, the wheel turning day is one of the 4 holidays in the Tibetan Buddhist calendar, right? It's the third one that we recognize. The first holiday is, of course, the Day of Miracles, which is the 15th of the first month. And that celebrates the 15 days of miracles that Shakyamuni Buddha offered in response to a challenge by a number of Tirthikas, or non-Buddhist sages, right? Where he performed miracles every day as he traveled around different parts of India to large audiences to help develop greater faith for all the practitioners, right? And then the second holiday we observe is on the 15th of the fourth month, and that is Sakadawa Duchen, which celebrates the anniversary of Shakyamuni Buddha's birth, as well as his achievement of enlightenment, as well as his passing away into nirvana. And then the fourth holiday is the 20th of the ninth month, or the 22nd. I think it's the 20th, but possibly 22nd. I'm not quite sure. Of the ninth month, and that is Labab Duchen. That is celebrating when the Shakyamuni Buddha had ascended to the realm of the 33, where his mother, Queen Maya, had taken rebirth after she passed away. And he was teaching Dharma to the inhabitants of the realm of the 33. And he was requested by his students to return to our realm of existence. And so at Labab Duchen, he did that. Today, the fourth day of the sixth month, is wheel turning day. So it's the anniversary of the Buddha's first sermon, where in his first sermon, so it's about 6 weeks after he achieved enlightenment, that he agreed finally to teach. And his first sermon was given to the 5 sadhus who he had practiced with, who had abandoned him once he stopped his extreme asceticism, right? And he taught the Four Noble Truths, which is the first sermon he taught. And so that first sermon is called the sutra, the wheel turning sutra, right? Choe Khor Sum Ling. But teaching or turning the wheel of Dharma in that way, teaching that first sermon, and then continuing to teach the teachings to continue to teach the Dharma, is one of the acts of a supreme emanation being, right? So we recognize that Shakyamuni Buddha was a supreme emanation being, which is one of the types of bodies of a Buddha that they can have. So in brief, the Buddha bodies, we say there are 2 Buddha bodies. There's the Dharmakaya, so the wisdom body, and the Rupakaya, the form body, right? And the Dharmakaya has 2, this is simplifying it, there are subdivisions, right? But there are generally 2 divisions of the Dharmakaya. So of the Dharmakaya, there is the Yeshe Chuku, so the wisdom Dharma body, and that is the enlightened mind of a Buddha. And then there's the Ngoyiku, so the Sobhavakaya, which is the essence body, right, or nature body of a Buddha, and that is the not the lack of true existence that exists within the continuum of a Buddha, the emptiness that exists within the continuum of a Buddha, is the no niku. And then the form body also generally has 2, right? First is the lonku, so the Sambhogakaya, the supreme emanation body, or excuse me, the supreme enjoyment body. And the supreme enjoyment body is a type of body of a Buddha that we don't have the karma to experience, right? Because the supreme enjoyment body is marked by having these 5 definite characteristics. The first characteristic is that they have the 32 marks and the 80 minor signs of a Buddha, but they also are born, or they take birth rather, or they exist in Akanishta heaven, in the Buddha land of Akanishta heaven, and they are surrounded by a retinue of Arya Bodhisattvas. And then they also teach the Mahayana Dharma. They have a definite Dharma that they teach, and their timing is definite. So they have definite body, definite place, definite retinue, definite Dharma, and definite timing. And the timing is until samsara is emptied. They will continue to teach the Dharma. So that's a enjoyment body. And then the other type of form body is a tuku, or an emanation body. And emanation body also has a subdivision. So an emanation body is any um any emanation that a Buddha takes that we can experience, right? So we might say that His Holiness Dalai Lama is an emanation body, right? If you have the faith and belief that His Holiness Dalai Lama is in fact a Buddha, and an emanation of Chenrezig, then he is an emanation body. But another subdivision of that is the supreme emanation body. And a supreme emanation body is marked by performing the 12 great deeds, right? Or the 12 great deeds of a supreme emanation body. So it's right there in the name, right? And so what are those 12 great deeds? Who knows? The first one, I'll give you the first one. Let's see if we can go from there. We can work them out together. The first one is that um, they descend from the Tushita heaven to our realm. That's the first of the 12 great deeds.
Then
I
maybe
see.
taking birth.
Taking
Taking
birth
birth.
is so first they enter into the womb and then into the womb of a human mother, and then they take birth. So that's two and three. Entering into the womb and taking birth are two and three. And then four is they show unsurpassed skill in worldly activities, right? So whether that be strength or showing off how strong they are, or their skill in handicrafts and all these things, they have skill in worldly activities in this way. Which is why when you see a life story of Shakyamuni Buddha, before he becomes the Buddha in these life story, you see him like holding an elephant over his head and things like this, right? So that's the fourth one, showing off skill in a worldly skill. And then the fifth one is they enjoy a harem of wives, right? And then those are considered, the first five are considered the worldly um, great deeds. Then the remaining are the great deeds of a renunciant. So the sixth one is they renounce worldly life and become a monk, right? That's the sixth one. So in Shakyamuni Buddha's, that is when he, gave up his wife and his son, and he left the kingdom and he cut his hair and became a monk. And then the seventh one is they practice difficult asceticism for a length of time. They engage in difficult ascetic practices. And then the eighth is they meditate under the Bodhi tree. The ninth is they defeat all of the maras, right? So all of the different manifestations of harmful intention that are trying to disrupt them and trying to stop them from achieving enlightenment. So they meditate under the tree. That's eight. They defeat all the maras, and then they attain enlightenment. That's number 10. And then 11 is they turn the wheel of Dharma by teaching and by engaging in the activity of teaching. And then the 12th is that they show the aspect of passing into parinirvana. So these 12 deeds are the 12 enlightened activities of a supreme emanation being, right? And now you'll see some lists that change. They're sometimes sitting under the tree and defeating the Maras are combined. So sometimes there's a little wiggle room there, okay? So if you see another list that's a little bit different, that's why. But in general, that is the list. That's the most common list of 12. So of that list, teaching the Dharma is an important part. That's part of what makes Shakyamuni Buddha so special, right? We say he is the fourth Buddha to exist in this age because he practiced all, or he embodied all 12 of those activities. And so teaching the Four Noble Truths as the first teaching, it's interesting because the Four Noble Truths are taught in a very specific order, right? So the truth of suffering is first, and then the truth of the origin of suffering, then the truth of the cessation of suffering, and then the truth of the path of cessation, right? And so why did he teach them in that order? It's worth thinking about. And then we look at that and how important it was that they were taught in that sequence. And then we look at the Lamrim teachings and we say that why are these teachings are taught in a different order? So the teachings that we're studying today aren't taught in the same order, right? So the truth of suffering was taught first because sentient beings, in order to wish to be free from suffering, you actually have to understand the depths of your suffering, right? So you can look at the Four Noble Truths into two groups. One group is the truths that are completely afflicted, I suppose you could say. Yeah. And then you have the Nampardambe Chok. And then you have the truths that are completely afflicted are the first two, the truth of suffering and the truth of the cause of suffering, right? And then you have the truths that are completely or entirely pure, I suppose, or Dampa, superior. And those are the truths of cessation and the truth of the path. And within each of those groups of two, you have a cause and an effect, right? However, the way they're taught, the effects are taught first and then the cause. So you have the truth of suffering. That is the effect of the truth of the origin of suffering, right? And then you have the truth of the cessation of suffering, which is the effect or the result of the truth of the path that leads to the cessation of suffering. So he didn't teach the cause first and then the result, right? Because the result, especially the truth of suffering, is what we're experiencing right now. And if we actually want to get rid of it, we have to recognize the depths of suffering we're actually experiencing. And so sentient beings thought that their suffering was limited to the suffering of suffering, that coarse suffering that they experience, such as sickness and illness and old age and death. Then the motivation to actually be free from that is very meager, right? But by recognizing the actual depth of suffering, then you have the motivation to overcome it. And that's when you have to understand where that suffering comes from, which is why the effect was taught first and the cause of that was taught second. So when he was teaching what sentient beings needed, the sequence that they needed in order to absorb the teachings and to make the most of them. So in the same way, the Lamrim teachings are taught in this sequence because that is what we need in order to understand how to engage in these practices and how to take where we are in samsara right now and from there go towards enlightenment, right? So the sequence is not the same, right? So the truth of the cause of suffering is karma and delusion, right? And so karma isn't taught first, nor is suffering taught first in the Lamrim sequence, right? Suffering will be taught coming up soon, which is for those who want to, the small scope beings, you learn the suffering of the lower realms, right? To develop fear of the lower realms. And based on that fear, then you develop refuge in the Buddha Dharma Sangha. So that those are taught coming up. But first, before them, we have how to properly rely on a teacher, how to understand a perfect human rebirth, and then how to engage or how to meditate on death and impermanence, right? And the reason that the Lamrim teachings are taught in this order is because they are not just explaining the nature of reality to you, but they are compelling you on the spiritual path. And they're showing you the way that these teachings lock into one another to always be pushing you forward, right? And the reason, the way I think about it is that the Dharma meets us where we are. So for those first 5 disciples of the Buddha, having taught the Four Noble Truths in that sequence was incredibly important, right? It helped them overcome all of their obstacles so they could quickly achieve realizations. And as a general overview or an introduction to understanding the nature of samsara, the Four Noble Truths being taught in that sequence is incredibly important. And then once you have some belief in the teachings of the Dharma, and instead of just trying to understand the overview, you're looking to practice, that's when the Lamrim teachings meet us where we are and say, okay, you know all the pieces. Now let me show you how all those pieces fit together in a different way that can compel your practice to be more fruitful, right? To be more active. But it's not just in these types of teachings. It's my experience that the Dharma always meets us where we are, right? Because within the teachings of the Buddha, there is advice to cover every situation we might experience in our life. There's nothing about our 21st century life that isn't covered by the teachings of the Buddha, right? Our solution to whatever type of suffering we may experience exists in the teachings of the Buddha. And 2 different people may receive the exact same Dharma instruction, but what they're going to get from it might be entirely different. And that's because the Dharma is meeting them where they are and giving them what they need to continue on the path towards Buddhahood. And not everyone needs the same thing at the same time. And the Dharma has a flexibility about it that allows those of us who are devoted to it, who listen to the Dharma, who recognize that all the teachings of the Buddha are without contradiction and they all are personal advice for us to guide us to Buddhahood, those of us who are able to hold that, then the Dharma meets us where we are and it gives us what we need, right? which may be different from person to person. It may be different from day to day for any individual. And so just reflecting on the fact of the sequence of the Four Noble Truths as Shakyamuni Buddha taught them, as part of his expression of the 12 supreme deeds of an emanation body, that sequence, and then the sequence that we study them as part of the Lamrim is different. Reflecting on the reasons for that, for me personally, gives me an opportunity first to kind of, work my investigative muscles. So why is that, right? I don't have to rely on some commentary telling me why. I say, well, what is the different experience I have when I study them in this order, when I study them in a different order? And by looking at my own personal experience being different, then I can say, well, what do I think is the reason they're taught in this different way? Right? That's what we're encouraged to do. We're not encouraged to simply take the Dharma as it was given to us at face value, right? There are a lot of things we have to learn, obviously, but trying to engage in the interpretive work on our own is the important part of studying these texts and living these texts in a meaningful way. So just reflecting on that gives me a chance to dig deeper into the act of experiencing Dharma or receiving Dharma, but then it also allows me to appreciate the expansive quality of the Dharma even more when I realize that the exact same Dharma can be taught in different ways to meet the different needs of different students at different times. Right? So, especially on this holiday, I think that's a useful thing for us to think about, that we have access to Dharma in incredibly profound ways, and we're very fortunate for that. And the way we are able to receive that Dharma is meeting our needs, hopefully, right? Um, and because of that, the way we receive Dharma isn't the same way Dharma was transmitted 1,000 years ago, right? Or 2,000 years ago. There are overlaps, there are similarities, but we have access to Dharma and we receive Dharma in a different way because our experiences are different. And I think that's a joyful and incredibly uplifting thing to think about, right? Especially on this day when we celebrate the turning of the wheel of Dharma, which is, one of the first acts to help liberate all sentient beings. So with that, where we are in the middle length Lamrim is we're still right at the beginning. Yes.
When just one question. Is it always that any supreme being that will come, they will also go through the 12 deeds? Maybe not the similar way, like not everybody, like not under the Bodhi tree, but they will have the same set of experiences. Is that true for all the supreme beings?
Well, not a supreme being, a supreme emanation being is a specific category of emanation being. And so that's why
Okay.
we say the Buddha, Shakyamuni Buddha, is the fourth Buddha that came to our world, and the next one will be Maitreya, right? So anyone that is qualified as being a quote unquote supreme emanation being will go through those 12 steps, is what we say. Those 12, well, not, excuse me, not 12 steps, will perform those 12 deeds. So there are many other Buddhas that may be existing who aren't performing those 12 deeds. They just aren't, they don't get the title of supreme emanation being. That's all. It's a say, I have confidence that His Holiness Dalai Lama is an emanation being, but he's not a supreme emanation being because he didn't perform those 12 deeds, right? But I believe he's a Buddha and he's an emanation of Chenrezig, of Avalokiteshvara, and therefore he's an emanation being, but he's not a supreme emanation being, quote unquote. So that is just a matter of classification.
Okay. Thank you, Venerable.
Venerable.
Yeah.
So, when you're saying the first teaching, turning a wheel of Dharma, was given to the Vaibhashikas, right? So, are we saying
Mm,
there where he says the Four Noble Truths are truly existing was because, as per their capacities, because they were not ready for emptiness? So, is
mm.
that the right way to look at it? Because Vaibhashikas were
Yeah.
the.
So we have to kind of distinguish between the first turning in the wheel of Dharma as a category and as the first sermon, which are two slightly different things, right?
Right.
But they both go to your point. So we generally say there are three turnings of the wheel of Dharma. The first turning, he primarily, not exclusively, but primarily taught the Hinayana teachings, including the Four Noble Truths and so on. The middle turning on the wheel of Dharma is when he taught the emptiness teachings and all of the Prajnaparamita teachings. And the third turning of the wheel of Dharma is when he taught the uncommon Chitamatra or Yogacara positions or understanding of the nature of reality, right? And the way we understand it is they weren't sequential. there are some, this is a whole debate that you get to when you get to, what year is it? I think maybe your fifth year, or your fourth year. You debate the turnings of the wheel and whether there are some that say the first 15 years of his teaching, he taught the first turning, then the second 15 years, he taught the second turning, and the final 15 years, he taught the third turning. Like there's some arguments that you say that. And we say no, he taught them simultaneously, right? That he taught them simultaneously, but they're categorized into these three different things. But the Choe Khor Do, so the sutra of turning of the wheel Dharma, which is the first sutra he gave, the first teaching he gave, was to these five Vaibhashikas. So we say that the Hinayana schools, the two Hinayana schools, being the Vaibhashika and the Sautrantika, um, he didn't teach lack of true existence to them, but he did teach selflessness, like empty and selflessness. But their definition of emptiness was different, right? He taught selflessness of persons being both subtle and coarse. And for them, they experience the coarse selflessness of persons, meaning everything is selfless. And the subtle selflessness of persons is what they consider emptiness, or, everything is empty in that way. He didn't teach the emptiness of phenomena, and he didn't teach the lack of true existence. Exactly for the reason you said, is because for those disciples at that time, teaching that would have led them to nihilism, right? It would have led them to misunderstanding, and it would not have propelled them closer to Buddhahood. And in fact, if we look at the four different tenet systems that the Buddha taught, so the next two being the Yogacara or Chittamatra, and then finally Madhyamaka, he only taught selflessness of phenomena to the latter two, but he only taught everything not existing, not only not truly existing, but not existing by means of its own nature or its own characteristics, was only taught in the Prasangika Madhyamaka. And even the other Madhyamakas, the Swatantrika Madhyamakas, have the belief that things are taught, things exist by means of their own nature, right? So there's a different level of subtlety across the different schools to meet the needs of the students. Again, and this is where we get into that the thing we talked about at the beginning, is that even though these seem contradictory, they all are leading to Buddhahood because he's teaching to an audience that needs to receive the teachings in that way in order to propel them closer to Buddhahood, right? And so in the first turning of the wheel, he did teach actual emptiness. Like we have quotes, like, again, when we study this, you have definitions for each of the turnings of the wheel. And one of them is that he only taught Hinayana doctrine, and he didn't teach emptiness. And there are quotes from early sutras where we say, look, he's clearly teaching emptiness in this quote, right? Even if it's just a paragraph or a few sentences. So he did teach emptiness and selflessness of phenomena and selflessness of persons in the category of the first turning of the wheel of Dharma, but it wasn't the main subject. The main subject that was taught is the conventional truths. And that's because the main or primary audience for the first turning of the wheel of Dharma, or the not just Vaibhashika and Sautrantika, right? Those first two. Yeah, Sautrantika, yeah. But so again, it's important as we understand this, and this comes up a little bit today, actually, when we talk about the three scopes, which is where we are, is that those teachings aren't exclusive to the Vaibhashika and Sautrantika. They are the teachings of the Buddha that we hold to be true and to be evident, right? They just are included within our larger corpus of teachings. So they're not uncommon teachings for Vaibhashika, right? The first sermon is just as relevant to every philosophical school and to every Buddhist practitioner, regardless of who the audience was at the time, right? But the way it was taught in such a way to meet the needs of the audience. And that is what the Buddha did continuously in all of his teachings.
Thank you so much.
So getting to where we are in the text, we're on page 48 of the text right now, on the top of page 48. And if we want to understand the context, so after the preliminary instruction, what we really came to was how to properly rely on a teacher. And then once we know how to properly rely on a teacher, what to do once you are properly relying on a teacher, which has two subcategories. The first is to understand and appreciate the perfect human rebirth. And then the second is then what do you do with this perfect human rebirth? How do you make use of it, right? And so we completed all the discussion of perfect human rebirth over the last 2 weeks. And so then last week we moved on to, once you recognize the benefits of a perfect human rebirth, what do you do? How do you use your perfect human rebirth that is marked by the 8 freedoms and the 10 endowments? And that has 2 sections. The first one is the explanation of the 3 different scopes. And then it goes into how to practice those 3 scopes, right? So we're currently in the explanation of the 3 different scopes, or the 3 different types of practitioners. But before we go there, a quick quiz. What are the 3 primary causes for a perfect human rebirth? Go
Perfect
ahead.
morality, perfect generosity, and stainless prayers.
Exactly. So, pure morality, perfect generosity is usually what's listed, and then stainless prayers. Often they'll say generosity and so forth, but generosity is what we often consider most important. Of those 3, which is the most important?
Ethical
What do we think?
morality. Ethical
Morality,
morality.
exactly. Morality is the most important, right? That is the most important cause to be reborn as a human, is to have pure morality. And the reason that's important to remember is just because morality, especially in regard to abandoning the 10 non-virtuous actions and adopting the 10 virtuous actions, right? That's what we mean by morality, especially. There are other ways we can understand morality, but in this context, that's the main understanding of it. The reason that's important to remember is we look at our lives and we know that we do our best to avoid the 10 non-virtuous actions, but most of us probably aren't perfect at it, right? We try, but we slip up, you know? Probably most of us are probably pretty good at not killing and not stealing and not engaging in sexual misconduct. Those are like relatively easy. Not lying is a little more difficult. Um, Not having harsh words is more difficult, you know? Not gossiping is very difficult, right? So we can see that in our lives, we do our best to practice them and we exert effort, but it's not easy. So if we think of how difficult it is for those of us who are practicing to actually have pure morality, then that can make us appreciate all of the effort it must have taken for us to receive this perfect human rebirth. So in the past, we engaged in the practice of abandoning the 10 non-virtues and practicing the 10 virtues to such an extent that we created these causes that allow us to be reborn as a human. And when those causes were combined with, you know, generosity as well as the other perfections, along with stainless prayers, that meant not only were we reborn as a human, but we were born as a human with the 8 freedoms and the 10 endowments, or some close approximation thereof, right? There are different teachings that talk about how, you know, the ripening karma of various activities and various mental states provide different things. So, for instance, you know, the sutras say that one of the ripening, completing karma of being incredibly generous is that you have wealth and you have easy access to either wealth or to goods and services. Or one of the types of completing karma that ripens as a result of morality is that you have a pleasant odor, a good smell. For some reason, morality is connected with that, which is why often lighting incense is representing a practice of morality. They talk about incense and morality kind of go together. One of the results of having perfect patience is that you have an attractive body, right? One of the results of not of actively avoiding jealousy is that you have a large group of friends or a retinue or people that care about you, right? So you can look at all the different um, perfections as well as all of the different positive and virtuous minds, and uh, there are taught to be different types of completing karma that ripens as a result of those, but those are all about the conditions, right? The most important thing is having the pure morality that actually propels you to be reborn as a human. And then when that's combined with stainless prayers, as well as the generosity and the perfections, that's what helps make sure you have the best conditions that allow you to engage in spiritual practice. And so just looking at how difficult it is to accumulate those causes in this life can lead us to appreciate how incredibly fortunate we are to receive this precious human rebirth, right? Because like me in this life, like the Gyalten Lekden of this life didn't perform all those actions that resulted in this human rebirth, right? My continuum did, you know. I have the karmic weight of my past lives that allowed or created the conditions for me to be reborn as an American who was attracted to the Dharma, who then became a monk, who has the opportunity to share the Dharma with others, right? Like the actions of my past lives created the karma that then ripened in this way. But me, myself, I didn't do that. I didn't do that work, right? So I'm just reaping the benefits of all of the hard work that I've done in past lives. And I know from this life how difficult it is to do that work. And so that makes me appreciate this life even more and the opportunities I have even more. And whenever I have obstacles and I experience obstacles, it allows me to look at those obstacles with a sense of perspective that says, yes, I have obstacles, but I have so many more privileges than I have obstacles, even if they're really great obstacles, right? And that allows me to try to have a mind that is less disturbed, that is more content, and that is more quickly turning to the Dharma as a way to navigate whatever distress I experience, right? So it's important to remember those causes of a perfect human rebirth and recognize how difficult it is to actually collect them. So we've moved on. Yes,
Venerable, a
yes,
question.
sure.
But it's also, I mean, when I look at my life today, I can be sure that I'm not being a human. I mean, I can get demoralized. And yeah, sometimes it does feel demoralizing because I look at my life up till now and I certainly haven't created those
Mhm,
conditions. And so I know that, and that I am not being a human in my next life. And that can be,
mhm,
depending on my state of mind, can be demoralizing, don't you think?
mhm. It can, I suppose, but at the same time, we can't change what we've already done in this life, right? I didn't meet the Dharma until I was 17 or 18. I'm sure many of you met it later than that, right? I can't change that. What I can do, and I didn't become a really devout practitioner until even after that, right? I can't change any of that. What I can do is change what I'm doing right now. So instead of being demoralized, I say I have an opportunity right now to engage in meaningful practice. And maybe I'm not engaging in perfect practice, but I'm doing the best I can. And if I'm doing the best I can, then I'm looking towards Buddhahood. I'm moving towards Buddhahood, right? We aren't expected to be perfect. Um, Karma is very complicated. And so we understand that these are the primary causes for a perfect human rebirth. Yet at the same time, as long as everything we do, we're doing our best to have the uncommon Mahayana attitude that wishes to become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. We're doing the best to apply the teachings of the Buddha as we understand them to our everyday life as much as we can. Then we're moving in the direction of Buddhahood, right? I can't guarantee what my next life is going to be, but I'm hoping that I'm creating enough causes that I will continue progressing towards Buddhahood. And I have confidence that as long as I'm doing the best I can do, even though that isn't perfect by any stretch of the imagination, if I'm doing the best I can do, I'm moving in the right direction. So when I have those moments of saying, like, what a waste of space I am, I say, okay, is that emotion helping me right now? Does that emotion cause me to want to engage in more practice? Does that cause me to want to engage in more virtuous activity? Or does it hold me back? Right? And if it holds me back, then what it's really doing is it's just a type of self-cherishing, right? Or it's a type of what we say is a type of laziness, the laziness of self-doubt and self-deprecation that holds us back from engaging in spiritual practice. Now, it's very common. I have it. I'm sure many of us have it, right? But we should use our intellect from our study to look at it and say, okay, I'm experiencing this emotion right now. Is this emotion benefiting me? Or can I allow this to propel me to engage in more practice? So having those moments of feeling dejected or feeling demoralized because we don't feel like we've done enough or we're too late coming to the Dharma or whatever it may be, when we have those moments, we shouldn't pretend they aren't real, but we recognize them and you say, okay, how can I use this experience to encourage me to engage in more practice? And I know that from my understanding and my engagement with the Dharma, that as long as I am doing my best, I'm moving in the right direction. Right. So I appreciate those moments. I definitely have them myself. But for me, I try to look at them as opportunities for me to encourage my practice as opposed to judging myself, because that judgment doesn't do anything useful in my life.
Yes, yes, thank you.
But also, like, they're common. So don't feel like I'm the only one that has these feelings, right? That's part of when we study the Dharma and we study karma, especially. It's very easy to be overwhelmed by these experience of like, I'm such a bad person, right? Because I'm doing it wrong, or I haven't done it right, or I'm not making the most of my life. It's very easy to take these teachings and combine them with our kind of 21st century sensibilities of guilt and shame and allow them to hold us back, right? That's a very common experience. We have to do our best to resist that and rely upon our own intellect and our own understanding of the Dharma and our faith in our teachers that tell us that as long as we're doing our best, we're moving in the right direction. And with that confidence, then we can allow those moments to propel us forward, right?
Can I please ask a follow-up question? Alice speaking.
Sure.
I have also sometimes been thinking about this, and I'm wondering to what extent can we compensate for our lack of creating the causes in this life for a future perfect human rebirth by rejoicing in, the fact that others have in the past and now are doing so, and maybe, of course, we did in the past, but we don't know if that karma is already kind of burnt or not. But can we, to some extent, compensate by rejoicing in this very people creating the causes for having a precious human rebirth?
Hmm. I mean, rejoicing is one of the most powerful activities we can do, right? Rejoicing is finding joy in virtue and finding joy in the consequences of virtue. So it's incredibly, incredibly powerful. It's an incredibly powerful way for us to help get rid of our ego and our selfishness, as well as to generate merit. The idea of compensation, I don't, even though the teachings say here are these three primary causes of perfect human rebirth, I tend not to try to fix too much on the mathematics of it. Do you know what I mean? If I do this much, if I have this many stainless prayers combined with this much perfect morality, combined with this many perfections, that's going to get me this many perfect human rebirths. Like that kind of mathematics and calculus is above my pay grade. So I tend not to think in that way. It's a language of compensation. It seems to suggest, I'm not saying you mean this, but like this is what I hear when I use that language, is I think of, oh, it's okay for me to be a little lazy in this area if I'm better in this area, right? And that kind of calculus I don't like thinking about because it's not useful for me to be lazy in any area. I do the best I can do. So if the best I can do, given my circumstances, given my resources, given my state of mind, given what is in front of me, is that I can rejoice in others. If that's the best I can do, then that's excellent. That's what I should be doing, right? If I don't have the means to engage in other activities for whatever reason at this time, then I should do the best I can do, even if that is only rejoicing, right? So I don't think of it as compensating. I think of it a more holistic approach than that all these different things work together, right? And again, in the same way that, for instance, purifying negative karma we created in the past also helps propel us towards a future rebirth of a human rebirth because we are getting rid of the causes for harmful or negative rebirths, right? By engaging in purification practice. So all the different practices that accumulate merit point us towards a human rebirth and towards a human rebirth that gives us access to the Dharma, right? All of them do. They're all participating in it in a holistic way. But these three things are the most important. So we have to look at our environment, our resources, our capability, and do the best we can do with whatever that is. And so rejoicing, I think, is an important part of that. I don't like to think of it as compensating, though. When I think of compensation, I think of giving myself permission to be lazy in one area and then make up for it in another area, right? So I don't study all week, but then the night before my exam, I chug a few Red Bulls and I stay up all night. That's what I think of as compensation. So I don't like to think of virtuous activity in that way, right? However, rejoicing is really powerful. So um, it definitely can, it definitely is an important aspect of our practice. Put it that way.
Thank you.
There's a, it's not so strong now, but in the monastery, there's been a big push a few times to ban Red Bull and other energy drinks. And you'll go to the stores around the monastery, and there are these big signs that say like "No Monster" and "No Red Bull," and they have like signs posted outside of the stores. And that's coming from Saralachi. So Saralachi is the governing body that governs both Sarajay and Saramay, right? Because we're all on one campus. And then you go in the stores, and in the cooler there is Red Bull and Monster. So I don't really know who is pushing it, but it never lasts. It never lasts very long. And there's no real push to stop coffee, and there's cafes everywhere. So it's kind of a very silly thing. But you see signs at the monastery, no Monster, no Red Bull. And I do agree, that's not a great way to live your life by those. If however, I have to have my coffee every day. So who am I to speak? What am I to say? So where we are in the text. So moving on, there are no more questions at the moment. Let's continue. We have, like I said, we have just started the section of having completed understanding what it means to have a perfect human rebirth. Then we're moving on to how to take the most of the perfect human rebirth, how to take the essence of it. And we started with the description of the 3 different scopes of practitioners. So the 3 different scope of Buddhist spiritual practitioners, we have them as a small, medium, and large scope is how we classify them. The small scope are those people who are practicing rather, with the intention to have a perfect human rebirth in the future and to have a positive rebirth in the future. So they're not focused on this life, but they are focused on having a positive rebirth in samsara. That's the small scope. The medium scope are the practitioners who are acting with the intention to be free from samsara for themselves alone. And then the great scope are those who are acting or performing or practicing with the intention to become a Buddha in order to liberate all sentient beings and free all sentient beings from samsara. So we've already had that discussion. And now we're on top of page 48 at the section that is called All Paths Are Contained in the 3 Trainings. So the larger section that we're part of right now is understanding why the 3 types of beings or 3 types of practices were taught in this sequence, right? Or taught in this sequence in the Lamrim and in Atisha's text. So that's where we are, to give us a little context. Now the 3 trainings, right? The 3 trainings are the training of ethical discipline or morality, concentration, and wisdom, right? Those are the 3 trainings. And so jumping right in here, it says, accordingly, except for the accomplishment of calm abiding and special insight, everything up to and including the trainings of the vow of engaging mind of enlightenment constitutes training in ethics. So that's saying all of the aspects of the Lamrim up until the 5th and the 6th paramitas, where you engage in the study of calm abiding, which is the 5th paramita, is where we study it. And then the study of special insight, which is at the 6th paramita. Up until then, everything before there, starting with how to rely on a teacher, all the way up to the 4th paramita, so the paramita of joyful perseverance, those are included within the category of the training of ethics or morality. Calm abiding is the training in the mind. So this is to say, the training of concentration. And special insight is the training in wisdom. So it says in the commentary on the difficult points of the lamp of the path to enlightenment. So this is just helping us create a schema to understand how all the teachings work together, right? Because then they give another one. Furthermore, everything up to and including calm abiding is considered method, which is to say it's the collection of merit, which is also known as the path based on conventional truths and the stages of the vast path. So if we want to divide everything into 2, into merit and wisdom, then we say everything starting from how to properly rely on a guru, all the way up to calm abiding, which is the 5th paramita, are considered to be method. They're considered to be the vast path, right? While the generation of the 3 special wisdoms is wisdom, which is to say the collection of wisdom, which is to say that which is based on the ultimate truths, which is to say the stages of the profound path. So here, each of these has 4 different names. Those are just synonyms for describing the same thing, right? So the collection of wisdom and that which is based on ultimate truth and the stages of the profound path, those are all the same thing, the practice of wisdom. And the vast path, the stages of the vast path, everything based on conventional truth, and the collection of merit or the accumulation of merit, those are all the merit practices, right? And here we say the 3 special wisdoms, Choe Khor Sum. The 3 special wisdoms are the wisdom that understands conventional reality, the wisdom that understands ultimate reality, and the wisdom that brings about the aims of other sentient beings are the 3 wisdoms that are being referred to here. So all of these 2 sections are just showing that all of the things that we meditate on in the Lamrim practice, which include all 3 scopes, are included into these different paradigms of either 3, the 3 trainings, or the 2, the collection of merit and the collection of wisdom, right? So it's just showing different ways to show the categorizations. Having thus trained your continuum by means of the common paths, you must enter the Mantrayana, for once you've entered it, you quickly complete the 2 collections. So now we're moving on to saying, once you have engaged in all these practices that are part of the Lamrim, that complete the collection of merit and the collection of wisdom according to Sutra, then that is when you come and the Tantra teachings come in, right? So Mantrayana is another way of saying the Tantric practices. So again, we're looking at the reason they're taught in this order. So all the sequence we're taught, the reason the Lamrim is in this order is to encourage us to first show us that the heart of our path is relying on a teacher, and then showing us the great opportunity we have of the perfect human rebirth, which is the best basis upon which we can engage in spiritual practice, and then meditating on death and impermanence to propel us to develop the intense need and desire to practice all the time, and then to train our mind sequentially from the different subjects that all combine into completing the two collections, right? And then the culmination of that is then you engage in tantric practice. However, if you cannot manage more than the path of the perfections, which is also called the Sutra Yana or the Paramita Yana, or if, due to the small power of your lineage, you do not want to, you should just expand on these very stages of the path more and more. So Tsongkhapa is saying the natural expansion of the perfection of wisdom, or of the sixth perfection and the Sutrayana, is the Mantrayana. But if for whatever reason you aren't inclined to practice Tantra, that doesn't mean you should stop. It means you continue engaging in these practices again and again and again, accumulating greater collections of wisdom and a greater collection of merit in dependence on the three trainings as taught, of course, the Sutrayana Lamrim, right? So it's not all or nothing here, right? That's what he's saying. As for engagement in mantra, the Lamrim teachings from Atisha and Tsongkhapa and everyone in that lineage, they contain the teachings that go all the way up to Buddhahood. However, the teachings on Tantra are usually like one verse at the end that says, and then practice Tantra. Like that is how they're included, right? Like they don't give details. Usually Lamrim are focused on Sutrayana practices, on what we call the Paramitayana practices. And they acknowledge that practicing Tantra is the culmination of practicing that. We say in our lineage, or not in our lineage, Tibetan Buddhism says that if you don't practice Tantra, you don't actually become a Buddha. You need to practice Tantra to go from to transfer or to go from a 10th stage Bodhisattva to an actual Buddha. You do need to practice highest yoga Tantra, right? However, in the Lamrim tradition, that's relegated to like one verse at the end without a lot of details. So here he's just saying, he's adding it in here, showing that it is the logical culmination. And at the very end, there'll be like one short section on like, and then you practice Tantra, right? But there's not a lot of details. There are separate texts that are devoted to that. However, the important thing is that Tantra is included in the Lamrim tradition. That's an important thing for us to remember, right? It is part of the Lamrim tradition. Now, Tsongkhapa says, just in the section we just said, that if for whatever reason you don't practice Tantra, that doesn't mean give up everything. It means you should just keep practicing in the Paramitayana to increase your two collections more and more. However, as for the engagement in mantra, since proper reliance on a spiritual teacher is generally given great emphasis in all the vehicles, and particularly in mantra, you should make it even more preeminent in this context than before. Then, having ripened your continuum by means of an empowerment that comes from a pure Tantra class, you should risk your life for. That is to say, you should guard the commitments and the vows that you've obtained at that time. Especially since, if a root downfall occurs, even though you take the vow again, it will spoil your mind and it will become difficult for positive qualities to develop. Do not be tainted by one. You should not become tainted even by a secondary downfall, and if you do, you should not be unconcerned about it, but you should purify it through confession and restraint. Then you should be guided as appropriate in the yoga with signs in accordance with the lower Tantra classes, or in the yoga of the generation stage in accordance with the higher Tantra classes. And then on that basis, you should train in the appropriate, as appropriate in the yoga without signs in accordance with the lower Tantra classes, or the yoga of the completion stage according to the higher Tantra classes. So what he's just pointing to here is that once you want to engage in Tantra, it's not just, okay, I'm going to go do Tantra now, right? There's also a sequence, which is to say, once you've developed proper reliance on a guru, then you receive an initiation into a proper initiation into one of the 4 Tantra classes, right? And then eventually you receive initiation into a highest yoga Tantra class, which is when you'll receive your Tantric vows. And then you keep your vows and your commitments. Here it says, you should risk your own life, which is really just saying that keeping your vows as pure as possible is the most important thing you can do. And then whenever you do break a vow, you immediately purify it to the best of your ability through confession and restraint. And so that's the process, right? Relying on a guru, receiving initiation, receiving higher initiation, keeping your vows purely, and then within your tantric practice, there's also a sequence of meditations. So in the lower tantra practices, you first start what's called the yoga with signs, and then from there you develop the yoga without signs. So those are just two types of meditation practices. Those are two different stages of practice. And then in the highest yoga tantra, you first start with the generation stage meditation practice, and then the completion stage meditation practice. So this is just showing us that there is a sequence within Tantra as well. So it's not just like, okay, I'm going to practice Tantra now, right? There's a sequence within that as well, which is what is very briefly taught in these two paragraphs. Such is the structure and presentation of the path set forth in Lamp to the Path for Enlightenment, and the stages of the path also guide students in the same way. So then what is the purpose of this perfect human rebirth? That is the next category. And this has 2 points, the actual purpose and the sources. Or excuse me, the purpose of teaching it sequentially. That's what this heading is. The purpose of teaching sequentially. If the teaching cycles of lesser and intermediate beings are the preparatory practices of great beings, then it should indeed be all right to consider them the stages of the path of great beings. So what is the use of the phrase, the stages of the path, in common to lesser and intermediate beings? So this is a question that is posed. He's saying, if we say that as people practicing the path of great beings, we have to include all these other practices, right? Then that by default, those are stages on the path of a great being. So why do we have this categorization? If we say meditating on perfect human rebirth and death and impermanence are a necessary part of our path as people who are practicing the Mahayana, then they're stages on the path of a great being. Why do we then call them stages in the path that are in common with a small scope being? And the answer is there are two great purposes for classifying and for guiding the three types of beings in this way. The first is, in this way, the conceit of claiming oneself to be a great being, while the mental attitudes common to lesser and intermediate beings have not even arisen, is overcome, right? So basically, don't get too big for your britches, is what that one is. If we don't recognize that there is this sequence, then it can be very easy to, without ever engaging or developing the realizations that occur in common with those lower scope practitioners. We say, look at me, I am a Mahayana practitioner. I'm a Bodhisattva practitioner. So this is helping us tame that down to say that our practices are in common with them, right? And then the second one is that all three, the highest, intermediate, and least mental attitudes have great benefits. So he's pointing out these two purposes, one from our side and one from the side of the other practitioners. The way in which these two purposes are great is that since the two more advanced beings also need to strive for higher status, which is to say perfect human rebirth, and liberation, there is no fault in teaching great or intermediate individuals who are to be guided how to train in the thoughts of those two, because positive qualities are developed. However, if a lesser person trains beginning with the more advanced ones, then the more advanced thoughts will not arise, and the lesser ones will be cast away, so nothing at all will develop. Moreover, through being taught the common path and through training in it, those with good fortune of superior capacity will soon develop positive qualities that had or had not arisen before, whereby they can be guided to higher and higher levels once the lower ones have arisen. Thereby their path will not be prolonged. So he's saying that the reason having these three categories and talking about them as being in common is useful is because depending on the capacity of the student, it gives them a place to start that meets their needs where they are. If we only talked about this with the category of being part of the path of the great being, then a smaller scope being whose mind was attuned to those levels of realization or those levels of practice, they would be discouraged. And their discouragement would cause them to not only not engage in practice, to not develop insight or wisdom, but to then not even practice at all, right? So by having this division, it allows all of the students, regardless of what their predisposition is, to have the Dharma meet them where they are. And if you are a being like all of us who are striving to be a being of great capacity and to practice the Mahayana, there's nothing that is taken away from us by recognizing that our practices are shared in common, right, with the other scopes. And in fact, it helps decrease our pride and it helps encourage us to develop good qualities and realizations and insights in a stronger and more forceful way, because it gives us a sequence of practice that builds one upon the other. So we aren't thrown into the deep end. We're giving a way to create a foundation and then build upon it. And by doing that, every stage of our practice becomes more secure and becomes more powerful. So that is what he is saying, is that the reason for classifying them in these three ways, right? The need to develop the mind gradually is proclaimed in the sutra requested by the king, lord of Dharanis, through applying the analogy of a skilled jeweler gradually cleaning precious stones to the meaning. The protector Nagarjuna also taught to gradually lead beings in the path of high status and certain goodness, with the verse, first the teachings of high status, then those of certain goodness come forth. Therefore, once you achieve high status, certain goodness will come by stages. So again, high status means perfect human rebirth, which is the goal or the motivation for the small scope being. And certain goodness means both liberation from samsara as well as Buddhahood. And those are the goals of the medium and great scope. So Nagarjuna also says, by starting with the teachings that are in common with the small scope, then you move on to the teachings that are in common with the medium scope and the great scope. And because of that, our realizations also sequentially develop. Arya Asanga also said, also, in order that the side of virtue be gradually accomplished properly, the Bodhisattva initially teaches those who have the wisdom of childish sentient beings easy Dharma and causes them to follow easy directions and instructions. Realizing that they have developed intermediate wisdom, he causes them to follow intermediate Dharma teachings and intermediate directions and instructions. Realizing that they then have developed vast wisdom, he teaches them the profound Dharma that causes them to follow subtle directions and instructions. And his beneficial activities fall on those sentient beings progressively. Aryadeva, in his lamp of summarized conduct, establishes that first the training in the contemplations of the perfection vehicle, after that the mode of engagement in mantra needs to be gradual. Summarizing the meaning of this, he says, in order for beings who are like beginners to get involved in the ultimate truths, the means the perfect Buddha expounded resemble the steps of a flight of stairs. So all these quotes are just Tsongkhapa reaching into the lineage, showing Indian sources as well as so Indian commentators, early Indian commentators, along with Shakyamuni Buddha himself, as the source to show that this sequential practice is appropriate for all sentient beings, right? It is an appropriate way of teaching. So by him using these sources in this way, he's showing that this isn't an invention that he made up, and it's also not a Tibetan invention, but instead it is something that goes back to the legacy of Shakyamuni Buddha himself, as well as the early Indian commentators. And that's why he quotes Nagarjuna and Asanga and Aryadeva, who are representing different lineages of practice, right? And so then, with that, we have finished the section of why it's important to take, or how to go about taking the essence of this perfect human rebirth. And now we move on to the actual way to take the essence of the perfect human rebirth, which is divided into three: training the mind in those stages of the path that are common to the lesser beings, and then training the mind in the stages of the path that are common to the intermediate beings, and then finally training the mind in the stages of the path that are common to great beings. So again,
Venerable.
yes.
No. So Venerable, I think in actual sense, we don't just stick to one kind of practice, right? Like of lesser beings. Like we should start from that, but gradually, when you study more,
Mhm.
then you want to, go to the next level, which is
Mhm.
of the medium beings, and then this is how, in actuality, and most of us would be doing everything mixed up. So, what
Yeah.
is the way, and how would so let's say, and there was a time when at least for me, I realized that I need to go back a little bit and think more about karma and suffering
Mhm.
rather than, so that kind of happens to and fro sometimes. So, what should be a good point for us to say, now I can move ahead, I can move next? Because I don't think it's very
Mhm.
sequential, and this is, I think,
Mhm.
I feel.
Yeah. So it's sequential in the sense that we can see how these different teachings and these topics and these meditative subjects build on one another, right? And so we can see that, for instance, just the three things we've covered so far, or rather, we've covered how to rely on a spiritual teacher, perfect human rebirth, and now we're going to death and impermanence, right? We can see how those three things You could jump into any one of those and find useful, meditate on it, and it would be useful. But if you recognize the sequence, it makes it a more powerful practice, right? So, as you said, we go back and forth. We're constantly practicing all of these, but we practice them, we study them in the sequence because that gives us context to understand why they're important. And that makes the practice of them and the understanding of them more deliberate, and it makes it more profound in that way. And then, as you say, you can analyze your own practice and say, right now, I'm having a real difficult time with karma or with whatever it may be. And you can focus your study and your practice on that topic, right? But you focus on that topic in the context of all of the different meditation topics. That's the important thing. You're not isolating it. You may be focusing on it, putting more time into that particular study and practice and contemplation, but you're recognizing the role that plays in the bigger picture, right? And in these sequential types of practice and study. So what exactly to meditate on at any given time, that's going to be due to your teacher's advice and your own exploration of your practice. But you're right that we don't start at the beginning, wait till we perfect it, and then move on. We're constantly going through all of them, right? Which is also why we talk about these. It's important for us to remember as people that are engaging in Mahayana practice to the best of our abilities. The reason we say these are the stages that are common to or shared in common with the lesser beings and the intermediate beings is because Mahayana motivation, the wish to become Buddha to benefit all sentient beings, is uncommon to the great scope beings. Yet we need to take that motivation and use that as what motivates us to practice these lower paths as well, right? So we always have to have the Mahayana motivation, even if we're engaging in meditation or contemplation or study on a topic that is in common with the lower scope or the medium scope. So the reason they're sequential is because they build on each other. But in your everyday life and in your practice, you're going to have to find a balance, You'll see, as we talk about today, there are quotes that come, so in this tradition, the way we're studying it is we haven't actually, let me take a step back. In general, if we say that there are the three scopes, we often include how to proper reliance on a guru and perfect human rebirth in the small scope, right? That's how we categorize it. Really, they're outside of the three scopes as Tsongkhapa presents it. And the first small scope meditation is death and impermanence, which is what we're getting to right now. But even if we accept those two as included in the small scope, now that we're on death and impermanence, you'll see, if we get there today, there are some quotes that say, if you think that you have finished this and you move on, you're doing it wrong. You always need to come back to death and impermanence because this is the only practice you have to remember, right? So it's reminding us that even these things that are at the very beginning of the path are important because they propel us at every step of the journey. If we forget the importance of meditating on death and impermanence, then it's going to be very hard to meditate on the importance of karma or the importance of the six paramitas, right? Because we won't have the motivation to do so. We'll be overcome, or it's easier to be overcome by laziness or a lack of interest because we don't realize how incredibly fortunate we are to have this perfect human rebirth, and we won't be motivated to make the most of it right now. So we always go back to these practices. They infiltrate everything we do, right? It's not like we complete it and we move on. They all are building on top of each other. Lama Zopa would often advise people to, if you're doing a long retreat, to focus on one, let's say you're doing a 1 month retreat. You might, or never mind a retreat. He might tell you to do, like he's told many students, you should spend 6 months primarily meditating on one topic and then doing the other topics in a small amount, but primary on one topic. And then the next 6 months, primary meditate on the next topics and a small amount for the others. And then like that, you know what I mean? So he will, depending on the student, it might be only 1 month, 1 month, 1 month, or 3 month, 3 month, 3 month, depending on the student and what their needs are. But he shows that you don't have to divide your time equally. You divide your time depending on what you need at that moment, right? So hopefully that helps. Come back to me if I didn't answer it well enough and it's not answered in the text.
Thank you.
Venerable,
Yeah.
may I? Sorry, I know we
Sure.
have another topic. Just a small question around that. In the beginning, you said the Dharma meets us where we are. And I was just thinking about that as you were explaining this right now. So it sounds like it would be okay to trust our I don't know what you call it, intuition, or sort of where what we are feeling called upon to study at that time. Would that be a good way to go? Because some days I want to understand the theory. Some days I want to practice, and I don't know where it comes from, but would it be okay to kind of trust that path for ourselves?
So with that, I say a tentative yes, right? And so what I mean by that is I have been following my intuition since beginning with time, and it's kept me locked in samsara, right?
Oh,
So we
okay.
have to be aware that sometimes our intuition is mixed with our delusions, right? So that happens. Yet at the same time, we can also say like, I'm doing my best to study the Dharma. I have an understanding, and I realize that right now this is important for me. And then we can lean into that. So we have to use our intellect and be wise about those choices. But if we are being wise about it, then yes, I think that is a thing we can do. Right. But it just should be something that we do intentionally and not because it's easy or comfortable. Unfortunately, the Dharma isn't really designed. I mean, the Dharma isn't designed, it's realized, but it's not there to make us feel comfortable. In fact, it makes us uncomfortable because we are so used to samsara that we find samsara comfortable. And what the Dharma does is teach us that all samsara is a suffering, which is in of itself a type of discomfort, right? To realize that. So with that regard, if we're just leaning into like what feels good at the moment, it's very easy for that to be a path of the delusions. So just use your wisdom to say to analyze, and then with that, yes, I agree that if you said like I'm really struggling with this particular topic right now, and meditating on compassion seems like what I really need to do, and it's more important than these other things, then you focus on compassion, right? Or focus on death and impermanence, or whatever it may be. So you're use your intuition, but do so wisely. If that makes
Okay.
sense.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. We
Thank you.
we always have to combine our analysis and wisdom with our emotional realities as well, right?
Yep. Okay. Thank you, Venerable.
Yeah. So, chapter 2, as it's marked in our book, the stages of the path common to lesser beings. This has 3 points: the actual training and the attitude of lesser beings, the measure of that attitude, and then cleaning up misconceptions about the attitudes of lesser beings. So the actual training has 2 points: generating the mental attitude of interest in future rebirths or future worlds, and then relying upon the methods for the happiness of future rebirths. So that first one, again, has 2 points. And the first one is being mindful of death, contemplating that one will not stay in this world for long. And 2, what will become of you in future existences, which is to say, contemplating the happiness and suffering of the 2 types of migrating beings. So all of the categories or objects of meditation on the small scope fit into these 2 categories, right? So the first one is explanation of how to be mindful of death, that one will not stay in this world for long. This in and of itself has 4 points: recognizing the disadvantages of not cultivating mindfulness of death, and then the advantages of cultivating a mindfulness of death. Then what kind of mind is a mindfulness of death that you are generating? And lastly, how to cultivate a mindfulness of death. Although in all of us, there is the thought that at the end of our days, death will come. Every day we think, I will not die today. And then also today, I will not die. That way, even right until we are about to die, the mind holds on to the idea that we are not going to die, right? This is just pointing out that intellectually, we all understand that we are mortal and that we're going to die. And yet, none of us believe it's going to happen today. Not a single one of us, right? And you meet people on their deathbed and they don't think they're going to die today, you know? I know when my mother was in her dying process, every day she didn't think it was her last day, you know? And so this is just reminding us that is a natural human thought as a samsaric being, is that we can intellectually understand that we're mortal and we're going to die, but we don't actually believe it's going to happen today. If you do not take to heart an antidote to this, so this thought, this lack of belief that we might die today is considered deleterious, right? Because it postpones our practice. So we need an antidote to that thought. So if you do not take to heart an antidote to this, if you are stupefied by such an idea and you think that you will remain in this life, you will keep thinking about ways of achieving happiness and eliminating suffering in this life only, thinking, I need this and I need that. A mind investigating meaningful goals, such as future lives, liberation, omniscience, will not arise, and whereby no allowances are made for engaging in Dharma. So what this is saying is, if you don't take seriously the fact that you are going to die, then even though you would never say, I am immortal, I'm going to live forever, you're acting that way. And therefore, you're only focused on the happiness of this life. and if you're only focused on the happiness of this life, then there's very little motivation to engage in any exploration of important Dharma topics. So as it says, there are no allowances made for engaging in the Dharma because you're not thinking about the happiness of future lives or liberation. You're thinking about the happiness of this life only because you have this belief that you may not express intellectually or through language, but you have this belief that you're going to continue living forever, right? And so you're only making accommodations to how this life can be more comfortable. Even if you engage in hearing, thinking, and meditating for 100 years, whatever virtue you do will have very little power because it is done for the sake of this life alone. Right? So this is reminding us that these three acts of study or hearing, and then contemplation, and then meditation, those are neutral acts, right? Those are how we encourage to study any new Dharma topic, by learning new information, contemplating it, developing certainty, getting rid of doubts, and then meditating in such a way to make it inseparable from our mind. That process is neutral. And so if you don't have a strong motivation that is looking at the very minimum, engaging or developing a perfect human rebirth in the future or a positive rebirth in the future, then you can use those three practices of study, contemplation, and meditation to focus on this life alone, right? And they become worldly activities. So the actions of study, contemplation, and meditation themselves are neutral. It depends on what we apply them to. And here he's saying that you could do them for 100 years, but if your motivation is worldly motivation, then those practices on their own aren't going to benefit you, or they won't benefit you very much. The power will be very weak. Since you will engage in them linked with faulty behavior, with negativities, and with downfalls, it will be rare for them not to be mixed with the causes of the lower realms. So any activities we do that are done with the motivation for the happiness of this life alone are uncommon for those activities not to be mixed with causes for rebirth in the lower realms. As long as our focus is on worldly happiness in this one life, then our activities that are aimed at that goal are, it's not 100%, but he says it is rare for those activities that are aimed at the goal of happiness in this life not to be mixed with causes for lower rebirth. Because all of the activities that are aimed at a goal of happiness in this life are mixed with self-cherishing, right? Because they're misunderstanding the nature of happiness and suffering. And they are not acknowledging that more important than happiness in this immediate moment, and more important than my own happiness, is developing on the path of spiritual practice that will allow me to find actual liberation from real suffering and to lead others to that place as well. So you don't have that if you don't actually believe that you might die. If you even if your words, even if your intellect and your lips say, yes, I know that I'm mortal, I'm going to die, if you act in such a way that you're only focusing on the benefits of this life, then you're avoiding all those things. Even,
Venerable.
yes.
Uh, so this is a bit confusing because don't they say that use what is happening in your life, take it on the path? So you use, so you can have maybe let's say I have a bad relationship with my neighbor, and I use that to examine anger or whatever, within myself. Yes, I'm doing it because I'm sick of having a bad relationship with my neighbor. I'd prefer to be more cordial. And so, but my immediate concern is the neighbor. I'm not thinking of well, death and impermanence
Yeah.
when, you know,
So what this is saying, Madhvi, is that ideally, in that situation, you take whatever's going on in your life, in your immediate life, but your motivation shouldn't simply be benefit of this life alone. So you can do that same practice with the motivation to um, have a Mahayana motivation, ideally, or at least a small scope motivation. Because you say, why do you want to not be angry with your neighbor? And why do you want to be cordial? Is it simply because that would make your life more comfortable? Or is it because if you eliminate an opportunity for anger, then that eliminates the opportunity to accumulate negative karma, both on your part and on your neighbor's part? And by not accumulating the negative karma that comes with anger, you have a greater capacity to have a perfect human rebirth in the future, so you can practice Mahayana Dharma, so you can achieve liberation and Buddhahood, right? So you say, why do I not want to be angry? Is it just simply because I don't want to be discomforted in this life? I don't want to have to deal with an ornery person. I don't want to be irritated. Or is it because by not being irritated, it gives me an opportunity to practice Dharma in a more meaningful way and to not accumulate negative karma that I would otherwise accumulate? So what you said is exactly correct. You can use that example, and you should use everything that happens in your life as part of your spiritual journey. But you have to look at your motivation, and you should always try to make your motivation as expansive as possible. And so that's what this is saying, is that if you tighten your motivation to only say, I don't like it, I don't like being, I don't like the discomfort of getting in a fight with my neighbor, and all you're looking for is the pleasure of being able to not have those arguments, then that is one of the 8 worldly concerns that's focused on the happiness that you want in this life only, right? So you could look at that same situation and then try to have a larger or more expansive motivation that says, yes, I don't want this hassle. But the reason I don't want this hassle isn't because I simply want to be happy right now. It's because this hassle is preventing me from engaging in spiritual practice. And this hassle is an object or an opportunity for negative karma to be accumulated by both parties involved. And that also is non beneficial. And so just by having that mindset, the actions you take might be the exact same, like the physical, external actions, but the mindset, the intention is different. And it gives you an opportunity to take your immediate experience onto your path of practice, but to do so with a Mahayana motivation. And that makes the practice more profound and more powerful, we'd say.
Yes, yes, I see that now. Thank you.
No, it's a good question, right? Because, we come to Buddhism, most of us that find Buddhism in this life, it's because whatever other spiritual practices we have or have not been following haven't met our needs, right? So we feel like there is something missing in our lives, and we want contentment, we want happiness, we want peace in this life. That is a normal thing for us to want, right? That is a very normal thing for us to want. And Buddhism isn't saying that you should be miserable all the time and just focused on what's going to happen in the future. Buddhism is giving us a path to find peace and contentment and happiness in this life, right? But it is saying that as long as you're focusing on that, then you're missing the bigger picture. So ideally, by having a bigger picture, you will experience peace and happiness and contentment in this life. But that shouldn't be your goal, right? So we have to try to find that balance, because of course we don't want to be fighting with our neighbors. We don't want to be experiencing difficulties. We don't want to have negative things happen to us if we can avoid them, right? I want to have a peaceful life, a happy life, a content life. Even if I recognize that my happiness is worldly happiness, I don't want to have a life that's filled with like misery all the time, like explicit, awful misery, right? So trying to find that balance of recognizing that, yes, part of me does want to live a life of contentment and peace, but I realize that that shouldn't be my primary goal. So finding that balance is important, and it's a good thing to remind ourselves, because Buddhism isn't about like whipping ourselves on the back and saying, I'm going to suffer now so I don't suffer in the future. That's not the point, right? We're not having, again, to use the language in the beginning, there's not a compensation in that way, that I'm taking suffering now so I don't have to do it in the future. The practice is recognizing that all of our practice, all of our activities, and all of our mental states can bring us towards contentment in this and all future lives. So it's just having a broader perspective, right? But it's an important question, and it's something that I think all of us come up against, right? We didn't come to Buddhism simply because already with the idea that I want happiness in future lives. We came to Buddhism because we were dissatisfied with whatever was happening in our lives at this moment. Or I can't speak for any of you, but most people I know that find Buddhism later in life, that weren't born into it, that are convert Buddhists, came to Buddhism because they found they were dissatisfied with their life as it was, right? So of course we want to have satisfaction in this life. We just need to realize that that can't be our primary goal.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah. Even if you aim, so continuing on page 52, even if you aim at future worlds and allow for their attainment, you will not be able to cease the laziness of postponement that thinks, I will do it later. A major effort at practicing properly will not come about as you while away your time with sleepiness, pointless chatter, and distractions of food, drink, and the like. So again, if you don't actually develop conviction that you are mortal, that you will die, then it's very easy to waste your time. Not only that, through putting great effort into the excellences of this life, the mental afflictions and the faulty behavior induced by them increase. And then you turn your back on the nectar of Dharma. Since that leads to the lower realms, what could be more inappropriate than that? So as long as you're focused on the 8 worldly concerns, having happiness in this life alone, then that is like turning your back to the Dharma. The 400 stanzas says, when someone sleeps as though at ease, as though the ruler of the 3 worlds, the Lord of Death, does not exist, what else could be more awful than that? So if you live your life pretending that this life will never end, so therefore all that matters is me finding happiness and gain and success for myself right now in this life, if that is how you live your life, not explicitly, but implicitly, that is, giving up such great opportunity. So what could be more awful than that? And engaging in the Bodhisattva conduct says, everything has to be abandoned. But unaware that this is so, I did negativities of all sorts for the sake of friends and foes. So just reminding us, everything has to be abandoned means that this life will come to an end. And all of the things I've accumulated in this life, right? All of the possessions I have, all of the everything that I've accumulated, I have to abandon it. I have to abandon this body. I have to abandon these clothes. I have to abandon all my books, which would be a hard thing to abandon, right? We have to abandon all these things, not because we want to or we choose to, but that's the nature of being a samsaric being who is going to die. And so if all of my work is about, all of my daily activity is about accumulating these things, then that's missing the point, right? So all I'm doing is accumulating negativity in that way. So then the next section says, the next point is the advantages. So those are the disadvantages. If we don't cultivate a mindfulness of death, the lack of cultivating mindfulness of death means that we're going to spend most of our time absorbed in the happiness of this life alone, which is to say that we will be following the 8 worldly concerns, which are the generals that are guided by the self-cherishing mind, right? So if we don't actively cultivate a mindfulness of death and come to accept it, then it's unlikely that we will ever be doing anything that is not focused on this life alone. So we'll just be indulging our self-cherishing mind. So that's the disadvantage. So then the advantages of cultivating a mindfulness of death also has 3 points. Once a genuine awareness, mindful of death, has developed. For instance, if you are convinced that you will die tomorrow, and you just have a little understanding of the Dharma, then you will see that henceforth you will be without the company of relatives and friends, and you will stop craving for them. In the majority of people, the wish to take the essence of this life by means of giving things away and the like will naturally arise. In that way, seeing that all the effort for the sake of worldly goals, such as fame and gain, are futile, you will turn away from faulty behavior, accumulate the good karma of taking refuge, engaging in morality, and the like. What could be more meaningful than ascending to sublime states oneself by those means, and then guiding migrating beings there as well? This is why being mindful of death is also praised with many analogies. In the great Final Nirvana Sutra, it says, among all plowing of fields, that in autumn is the best. Among all footprints, that of the elephant is the best. Among all discriminations, those of impermanence and death are the best. They eliminate all the desire, ignorance, and pride of the 3 realms. Similarly, mindfulness of death is praised, among other things, as a hammer that instantly destroys all mental afflictions and all faulty behaviors, and as a gateway to the simultaneous accomplishment of all that is virtuous and excellent. So he's saying, if you were convinced, and I'm sure you either have met people or you've seen examples of people who have had near-death experiences, right? When someone has had a near-death experience, how often do they then change their life? Because they realize, right? They're not taught it in some spiritual thing, but they have the sense that, oh my goodness, anything could happen. And so they change the way they live quite often. Now, often, if you are dependent on these kind of flashes of inspiration, they don't last, right? There could be people that have, I've gotten in car accidents before, and you get in a car accident, a bad one especially, and you say, oh, I'm going to be much more careful driving. I'm not ever going to drive like that again. That was scary. Put myself in danger. I put others in danger. And then, another car accident a couple months later, like that happens, right? This kind of thing. So if you're dependent on these external flashes of inspiration, then they're not going to be stable. But what it's saying is here, if you knew that you were going to die tomorrow, if you were guaranteed to know that, what would your priorities be? And what would the priorities be of someone who isn't even a spiritual practitioner, right? Most people, if they were given the news, you're going to die tomorrow, no matter what, that's guaranteed. What would they do? They wouldn't be holding on to their things because they'd realize holding on to these things is useless. There's no benefit to them, right? Now, depending on if you were a spiritual person or not, how you'd spend your last hours maybe is different, right? But the point of this is everyone realizes if you knew with certainty that you were going to die tomorrow, how would you act? And now, then the question is, if you would act that way because you had certainty of your death tomorrow, why are you not acting that way now? Because you don't have certainty that you won't die tomorrow, right? That's what's going to be coming up later. But that's what he's saying. And so these analogies, of all the discriminations we have, discrimination of impermanence and death is the best discrimination because it propels us to engage in virtuous activity, right? Because it shows us that there's no guarantee that we can practice virtue tomorrow. So there's no need to be holding on to possessions, to be seeking happiness outside of ourselves now, because we know that whatever we're grasping onto, we're going to have to let go when we die. So if you knew you're going to die tomorrow, or you had a definite conviction that of your own mortality, then you are encouraged to practice virtue, which is why it's considered the best or chief among all discriminations in this quote from the sutra. So it has great value. That's the first point. The second point is that mindfulness of death is the doorway to excellence. In brief, the time for achieving the goals of beings is only this time that we have gained this special basis, which is to say, this perfect human rebirth. We mostly remain in the lower realms, and even if we make it to the happy realms just once, they are predominantly places of unfreedom, so that we do not find an opportunity to accomplish the Dharma. If we gain a basis suited to accomplishing the Dharma, and we still do not accomplish it properly, that is due to the thought, I am not going to die yet. Therefore, this mind that holds us to the position of not dying is the door to all manner of degeneration, whereas mindfulness of death is the door to all excellence. So this is just another way of restating what we've already talked about before. And then the last point is that it is necessary to give up misunderstanding and meditate from the bottom of one's heart. Therefore, you should not think this is a practice for those who do not have other profound Dharma to meditate on. And although it is something to meditate on, it should be meditated on a bit in the beginning, but it is not suitable to be practiced continuously. Rather, you should meditate on it, which is to say, you should meditate on death and impermanence until you gain certainty from the bottom of your heart that it is necessary in the beginning and in the middle and in the end. So this is going back to this idea of what order we practice these meditations on, right? Meditating on death and impermanence. We need to engage in this meditation all the time with conviction, because it is only going to make all of our other meditations, all of our other study, all of our other contemplation, all of our other virtuous activities more powerful and more profound, because it is going to remind us of the uncertainty that we might be able to engage in these activities in the future, and therefore they become urgent, right? Meditating on death and impermanence gives an urgency to our practice, not an anxiety. If it's giving me anxiety, then you need to step back. Anxiety is not the goal, but urgency is the goal, right? And therefore, this practice is important at all times, in the beginning and the middle and the end. It's not something you do once and then you move on. So then the next point is, what is the kind of mind that is a mind that is mindful of death? When you generate that mind, what does it look like? And it says, the fear born from worries about separation from relatives and so on is the kind of fear of death of those who are not trained in the path. So here, that is not what it means. That is not the mind that is to be generated. So many of us, when we say we're afraid of dying, what do we mean when we say we're afraid of dying? We're afraid of losing all of our friends, our family. We're afraid of losing all of our things, right? That's a worldly fear. That is not what we're trying to generate, right? Well then, what kind of fear is to be generated? All bodies, taking under the power of karma and mental afflictions, which is to say all samsaric bodies, do not pass beyond death. So all samsaric beings are subject to birth, aging, sickness, and death. Which is why, even though this may give rise to fear, death cannot be prevented for the time being. However, without putting a stop to the causes of the lower realms, and without accomplishing the causes for high status and for certain goodness, you will fear death. In this regard, if you think about the resulting fear, these two can be accomplished, whereby you will not be afraid when on the verge of dying. If you do not achieve that objective, for fear of not being liberated from the cycle of existence in general and of falling to the lower realms in particular, then you'll be tormented by remorse at the time of death. So what this is saying, if we generate a healthy fear of death is a fear that we might be reborn in a lower realm, or we might experience great suffering in the future. That healthy fear of death is not a fear that we're losing all the nice things we've accomplished in this life. It's not a fear that we're going to have to be separated from our friends and our family. It's not a worldly fear. It's a fear that we are not engaging in the spiritual practices that eliminate the causes for lower rebirth and that collect the causes for a future rebirth. That is the healthy fear of death that we should be having right now, right? We shouldn't be afraid of losing all of the things we've collected. We should be afraid that we're not practicing in a way that promotes a perfect human rebirth and liberation and Buddhahood. And what is known about that is if we cultivate that healthy fear now, then at the actual moment of our death, we won't have any remorse and we will no longer be afraid because we'll know that we've done the best we could do, right? Again, we're not perfect. We're not expected to be perfect, but we do the best we can do. So if we cultivate a healthy fear now that says, I know that when I die, none of the things I've accumulated in this life will benefit me, but my practice is at least devoted to not engaging in non-virtue and practicing virtue. And in that way, I am eliminating the causes for lower rebirth, and I am promoting the accumulation and collection of causes for positive rebirth. If that's what your fear of death brings about, those two things, those two accomplishments, then at the moment of your death, you won't have any remorse, right? Because you'll know you've done the best you could do, that you've engaged in a meaningful spiritual life. However, if that's not the kind of fear of death you have, if you have a worldly fear of death that says, I don't want to die because I don't want to lose all of my things, I don't want to die because I don't want to give up all of the nice things that I have here in samsara, if that's the worldly fear that instead you practice, then at the time of death, your fear will only be compounded and you'll have great remorse and it'll be an even more difficult experience. That's what this is saying. So when we say that we need to cultivate a healthy fear of death, we have to be very clear about what that is, that we're not afraid of losing our samsaric possessions. We're not afraid of even losing this body. What we are afraid of is that of being reborn in a lower realm and not having the opportunity to engage in a free spiritual, to engage in spiritual practice, have the freedom to engage in spiritual practice in the future. So if that's our fear, then we can do something about that, which is avoid non-virtue and practice virtue. So that way we cut off those two fears. We cut off the causes for lower rebirth, we collect the causes for future rebirth, and then at the actual moment of our death, we can be peaceful, knowing that we've done the best we can do to give ourselves the best possible chance to have a positive human rebirth, to continue practicing a spiritual life. So this is a kind of fear that does not, we call it a healthy fear. It's a fear that promotes virtuous activity. It doesn't promote anxiety. It doesn't cause you to become immobilized or paralyzed, right? Instead, it promotes living in such a way that brings about contentment with what you have and practicing virtue so that you will be able to celebrate more in the future, right?
Venerable, I'm sorry, I've not understood that the two of it seems like the same thing to me. Because because if I'm going to worry about being born in lower realms, which means obviously I recognize that I am giving up this, existence, which in spite of all its problems has been so precious and, given me access to the Dharma and stuff like that. And so I am going to feel like holding on to it. How can I not? Even if I'm thinking of I should not be separated. Yes, that is a fear. I should not be separated from the Dharma. But then again, that causes me to hold on to this life where I have found the Dharma and where I don't have any certainty when I die, if I shall, in my next life. So, how are they different?
So the difference is the way what you're describing, the fear of being reborn in a lower realm and the uncertainty or the lack of guarantee of having a positive rebirth. That fear is a fear that propels you towards virtuous action. And at the moment of your death, if you can accept or you realize that you've done the best you can do, that fear doesn't paralyze you. It doesn't hold you back, right? Whereas if your real fear is, I don't want to be separated from these things that I like, then that fear is grasping on to this life, not because this life has spiritual capacity, not because this life has the potential to achieve Buddhahood, but because this life, the samsaric pleasure, is what you're grasping onto, right? And as long as you're grasping on a samsaric pleasure, it is like trying to hold water in your hands. You're never going to have anything to hold on to.
No,
So
but I'm
when
not.
that,
I'm
I'm not
not
saying you.
holding on.
No, I'm
No,
not saying
I
you, but I'm
mean,
saying that
no,
that
one
is
one
the.
need not. One need not. One can hold on to the fact that one has the leisure of
Yeah.
finding, of practicing the Dharma. One can hold on to the fact that one has the intellect of, understanding the
Yeah.
Dharma. And you don't know if in your next life, if you're a dog, then you will have to obviously give up all this. So I can hold on. I don't have to hold on to,
Yeah.
wealth and family. I can hold on to these things also, because I don't know if I'll be with them in my next life. So then again, how
So,
are they different?
so the difference is the first one, holding on to these worldly things, is what we're talking. So you're saying that's not what you're worried about. But the first type of fear, the worldly fear, is holding on specifically to worldly things. Now, what you're suggesting is that you can also be concerned that you haven't done enough to actually have a perfect human rebirth in the future, right? Which is what is encouraging you to practice now. So the difference is that healthy fear, it encourages you to practice in this life. And then through that practice, you have to have confidence in the teachings and confidence that you've done the best you can do, given your resources and your circumstances. So therefore, you don't hold on to that this is the one chance I have, right? You don't hold on to those things because at the moment of death or the dying process, you realize I've done the best I can do. I've made the most of this perfect human rebirth. I have engaged in virtuous activity intentionally and done my best to avoid non-virtue. And so because of that, that healthy fear is then uh, when combined with your practice, your study, and your understanding of the teachings and your faith in the teachings, it allows you to let go of those things, right? So I understand what you're saying, right? That I don't have attachment to this particular body, but I have attachment to this perfect human rebirth, for instance, right? And I have no guarantee of getting a perfect human rebirth in the future. All the teachings on perfect human rebirth say it is incredibly rare, something I've only found this one time, right? That's the teachings of it. Use that kind of exaggerated language. So it makes sense to be afraid of not having it again. But the difference is having that fear now promotes virtuous action now, virtuous behavior. It promotes spiritual practice. And that spiritual practice then should give you the confidence while you're in the dying process that since you've engaged in spiritual practice in a meaningful way, then there's no reason to have that fear of not having a positive rebirth, right? So that is the difference. You don't have to hold on to that. The fear itself is what motivates practice. That practice then eliminates the fear, which is why it says if you have that fear now, then at the time of death, you don't have that fear anymore. And of course, we can't really test this, right? We can't test if my practice now has allowed me to die without fear, right? Because that's kind of a thing you only can do once in this life. However, we can have confidence through the examples of practitioners I've known in my life who have showed the aspect of passing away or who have died, um, or non-practitioners who have died really frustrating and difficult deaths, right? I can use my experience with those things as well as my confidence in the teachings to see that if I allow my fear of not having a perfect human rebirth in the future, right? If I allow that fear to motivate me to engage in meaningful spiritual activity now, then I can trust, based on my understanding of the teachings, that when I die, I'll be able to die a more peaceful death, confident that I've done the best I can do. And I won't have remorse to say I could have done more, right? So that is what this is saying. Unfortunately, like, we can't test it. It's something we have to have a little bit of confidence in based on our teachings and our experience watching others go through the dying process, whether they're practitioners or not practitioners, right? Um, so that's what this is coming at, is that the difference is that one of them is a fear that makes your dying process more difficult, and one of them is a fear that when you get to the dying process, disappears, right? It's a good
Yes,
question, though. We can
yes,
be attached to virtuous things as well, right? If our minds get a little confused. Um, it's easy, I'm not saying you, I'm saying in general, to understand these teachings, understand the importance of a perfect human rebirth, and in my desire to celebrate and make the most of my perfect human rebirth, that gets mixed with some sort of self-cherishing mind that says, look at how great I am. Look at all these nice things I have. Look at what great opportunities I have to practice. And some self-cherishing can get mixed in there if we're not careful. And then we start grasping onto this as if having this now is the most important thing, right? As opposed to making the most use of it, you know? Making use of our perfect human rebirth is much more important than having a perfect human rebirth, right? In this moment right now. And
right.
so it's possible for our self-cherishing mind to get mixed in because it's good at getting mixed in with everything, right?
Yeah,
Um,
yeah,
so
yeah.
your question is a good one, but what I think it's important to hold on to is that if I am making the most of my life right now and allowing this fear to then propel me towards having refuge in the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha and engaging in virtue, then I have confidence that as I get to the act of dying, I'll no longer have this fear and I won't be holding on to this because I'll have confidence that I've made the most of my life. My life has been meaningful because it has been a life that is lived walking a spiritual path to the best of my ability. That's what it means to lead a meaningful life, right? Is to engage in a spiritual path to the best of our ability, giving our resources and our whatever accommodations we have.
Yes, yes, I see that. It's self-cherishing. I'm glad. Thank you so much for pointing that out.
Yes.
I hadn't got, I hadn't realized that that is what could be. Thank you so much, Venerable.
That's so instead of going on, this is like a good place to start next week. So if we have a few more minutes, if there are any questions, we can do that. Yeah. Yeah.
Then I have a question for me. Sorry.
Sure.
Yes.
Yeah.
Is it fair to say that one of the main goals of Dharma will be to have awareness? I mean, ultimate awareness that you can navigate your life in this life and navigate your mind through the Dharma and through the dreams, and you be able to choose what kind of existence you will have during this lifetime and the next lifetimes, like you are not in the passenger seat. Total awareness. I mean, not be the victim of our own karma, but produce our future destiny.
Yeah. So I would say that isn't the
I mean, total awareness.
I would say that isn't the goal of practice, except that that's really a starting point to our practice. So I agree with everything you're saying, but that's not the goal to realize that. That's the starting point, is realizing that we are born due to karma and delusions, right? But it doesn't make us a victim of it. It doesn't make us passive players. It means that we have the capacity to shape how we experience the world. That whatever obstacles or privileges we experience, we have the ability and the strength and the capacity to determine how we react to them. And therefore, we have the capacity to, like you said, be in the driver's seat, not the passenger seat. So that's the starting point of Dharma. And once you have that confidence, all these different practices add to that confidence. And the stronger that confidence is, the easier it is to practice virtue and the easier it is to find contentment. And whatever obstacles arise, it's much easier to overcome them and not be burdened by them, right? Even if they can't be overcome, right? You won't have mental distress at the very minimum. So I think that the practice of Dharma is to lead a meaningful life. And to lead a meaningful life is, like you said, that we don't recognize ourselves as victims. We do recognize that the things that we experience are due to the karma we've created in the past. And we can't necessarily change that. But what we can do is then change how we react to it. And by changing how we react to it, we choose what direction we're going. We choose what is going to happen to us in the future. And we choose what level of contentment, peace, and happiness we're going to have in this life and in future lives. So the Dharma, that's not the goal of the Dharma. That is the method. Like, that is the starting point of entering into the Dharma. And then the more we practice, the stronger that is. And the more in tune with that we become, I would say.
Okay, I totally understand. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Any, maybe time for one more question if we want. Okay. Actually, we've gone late. I'm sorry to keep you late. Oh, yeah, go ahead.
Yes. I understand all I read in the books of these authors, and I have no doubts or questions, profound questions, but I don't see much about the Buddhahood. I mean, when you are totally aware, understanding everything in this world, understand the bardo and the dreams and the sleep, whatever. When you understand everything and you are fully realized, it's like there's no much more explanation about your mind, because I know we are so far away from this state of mind. But I mean, I don't see much of this kind of awareness, a world of awareness, where beings are totally aware and producing a realm. I mean, totally plenty community, a fair community where everyone is in peace and everything is perfect. No one is producing suffering, and this is totally a different realm. But I don't see much about this. I don't read about this.
There's a lot of debate and discussion about what it is like to be a Buddha, right? Because by default, we can't understand it since we haven't achieved it. So we can only understand it as it's been taught to us and as we observe it. And there are different Tibetan traditions that explain Buddhahood or the experience of Buddhahood differently, as well as Indian traditions. So there are texts that talk about what the mind of a Buddha is like, right? And the fact that the Buddha understands the ultimate nature of all phenomena and has no dualistic appearance, yet in order to benefit sentient beings, engages with conventional reality in such a way that allows them to interact with other sentient beings without feeling any suffering or without experiencing any suffering at all, without ever having a moment of misunderstanding the nature of reality. But that's hard to understand, right? Like you said, we usually use similes and metaphors and other poetic examples because it's difficult for our minds to grasp what it would be like to even be a highly realized being, never mind a Buddha. I heard one teacher, and to be fair, this was a Westerner, he was an Australian monk. When someone asked, what is it like to be a Buddha? He said 24-hour party all the time, you know? I don't know if my Tibetan teachers would use
Sorry,
that same example.
for what? Sorry.
24-hour party all the time. 24-hour party, 7 days a week.
Okay, I understand that totally.
Now, I don't know if my Tibetan teachers would use that
No
same
angry,
example, right?
no worries, no
That might be
bad feelings.
an
I totally
Australian,
understand.
that might be some Australian beach Dharma right there. I don't know. But it's hard for us to understand, right? It is difficult for us to wrap our minds around what it would mean to actually live a life that has no suffering at all. And not only that, to live a life that doesn't have any misperception about the nature of reality, because that's something we can touch a little bit here and there through our practice. So there are texts that talk about it, but not a lot. And there are different opinions about the best way to try to study it and to understand it, because it is a difficult thing to talk about. So I don't
Totally
know what
understand.
Buddhahood is like, but I do know that the few moments where the Dharma has penetrated my mind in a meaningful way, those brief moments where I feel like I've done something right, have offered such a sense of contentment and bliss in this life, in this samsara, that if I'm able to achieve those brief moments through my practice, then I can only imagine that the more I practice, then a greater experience of those that are more long lasting, that are something I can harness in a more meaningful way. I can only imagine what that would be like, right? So I use my small moments of spiritual happiness and contentment as proof that there is even more possible, right? So that's the best I can do with my experience.
Yes, I totally understand. We are kind of addicted to dive ourselves in suffering, to criticize, to judge, to be kind of glad where contaminated the things. It's a kind of addiction. I mean, but
Yeah.
I understand what
Samsara
it's
is an
saying.
addiction.
Our this clips of well-being is the path, the proof that the well-being exists, and we can be more in this state of mind, understanding and awareness. I totally understand.
Okay, good. Well, hopefully that was helpful. I think we'll end it.
Totally,
I think we'll end
absolutely.
it there today, because it is after 7. So I'm sorry for keeping you late. Let's just take a moment to recognize that our studying of the Dharma today, especially on Wheel Turning Day, is an incredible opportunity to rejoice. There's an incredible merit you accumulate by studying the Dharma and by trying to apply the Dharma to your mind and to your life in general, and especially on a holy day like today. So whatever merit we've accumulated through our practice today, let's generate the wish that that merit might ripen on others, and we dedicate that merit so that others might be free from suffering. And so we will offer these brief dedication prayers. The first one we'll do once in Tibetan, and then we'll continue in English. Choe Sum Ling Ma Ke Panam Ke Gyalten Ke Wa Nyam Pa Me Pa Yang Gone gone du pale May the supreme jewel of bodhicitta that is not arisen arise and grow. May that which has arisen not diminish, but increase more and more. In the land encircled by snow mountains, you are the source of all happiness and good. All-powerful Chenrezig Tenzin Gyatso, please remain until samsara ends. Savior of the snowland teachings and transmigratory beings, who makes extremely clear the path that is the unification of emptiness and compassion, to the lotus holder Tenzin Gyatso I beseech, may all your holy wishes be spontaneously fulfilled. May the glorious Guru's lives be long and stable. May all beings equal in the extent of space have happiness. May I and others without exception accumulate merit, purify negativities, and may we be blessed to quickly attain Buddhahood. Thank you so much, everyone. I appreciate all of you. Thank you for spending this time with me today.
Thank you, Venerable.
Thank you,
so much,
Venerable.
sir.
Thank you so much, Venerable.
Very much, very much.
Thank you, Venerable.
Quick reminder on upcoming program. Tomorrow we have the next session on the guide to Bodhisattva's way of life. And next week we have again the Middle and Lamrim and the guide to Bodhisattva's way of life, and it will be hybrid, meaning you can attend in the center or online at the usual times. Thank you so much for joining, and see you again soon.
Thank you,
Have a
Alice.
great
you.
evening
Thank you,
or
Alice.
rest of the day. Take care.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Alice. Bye, everyone.
Kekse bir anda,